My name is Joon Lee. I'm an independent sports journalist. Prior to becoming an independent sports journalist, primarily on YouTube, I was at ESPN for 5.5 years, where I covered the intersection of sports and culture, did writing, did television, did a little bit of everything under the sun. And before that, I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and as part of the most entitled generation of sports fans ever, seeing all the championships in the city, and that's kind of, I think, what propelled me to want to pursue a career in this industry.
And when it comes to representation, like who do you look up to when it comes to that? Like maybe probably like family members or like friends or maybe other like content creators or maybe even like sports figures.
Sure. Wow. I mean, I would probably start with my parents, like my mom in particular. Like when we moved to the United States, I was 2 months old. I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and my mom didn't speak a ton of English when we moved here, and her being able to navigate raising me as a kid, in a place that she didn't know anyone. That's something that I still think about a lot to this day. My grandma on my dad's side was a single mom as well, and so I think about their kind of journeys, and their perseverance and their grit a lot in terms of how they were able to kind of make their lives for themselves from a sports perspective. I would say that I had three major mentors on the Asian American side, in the industry. Mina Kimes, Pablo Torre, and Jay Caspian Kang. Like, I've known them since I was in college, and they played a huge role in helping me to kind of navigate the early days of me starting out a career in this industry where there aren't a ton of Asian American faces and a lot of precedent for how to navigate all of the things that come with being a minority in a predominantly white upper class industry. And so I think that was huge for me, being able to, I think, just feel a level of comfort in learning how to navigate just the dynamics that come with having a public facing career that journalism is. And then I think there's so many like athletes that I could think about. Park Ji-sung, who was the star of the Korean national team in 2002. There's Ichiro. There's Jeremy Lin was a huge one. I've been following Jeremy's career since he was at Harvard, because I grew up in the Boston area, and he was, the star of the Harvard basketball team, and he was making a lot of noise even when he was there. And so when Linsanity happened, it really felt like a massive paradigm shift. And then I think just like seeing the way that, as a massive K-pop fan myself, the way that like groups like BTS and Blackpink have navigated kind of this new level of visibility, but also like, there's a whole generation of K-pop acts, whether it's Big Bang or God. There's like so many like people who kind of paved the way for this current generation of Korean entertainment to break through. And I've gotten to know a bunch of people who are also doing really cool things. And so I have a lot of friends in the industry who I very much admire and look up to, who are making waves and representing not just Korean Americans, but I think Asian Americans as a whole.
And how do you show, I guess, representation in your content?
Well, I think that I lean into who I am as a person, and sometimes that means leaning into having an Asian American or a Korean American point of view on things. I've personally never really worried about pigeonholing myself into just covering Asian stuff. Like, one of the first major stories that I covered, when I started at Bleacher Report, was the Winter Olympics, and it was Chloe Kim's first year. Um, in the Olympic competition, and she was a massive prodigy. And so I profiled her. I went to South Korea, and I covered her gold medal run. And I was able to talk to her parents in Korean, and kind of get a level of perspective and nuance that they weren't able to convey to the American media. And I really understood kind of their journey as like, people who had immigrated from South Korea, and built a life for themselves in the United States. And so it's those like moments that I think are really important, where it's like I'm not just writing about Asian issues. And if you look at my YouTube channel or my body of work, like it's probably a relatively small portion of stories that I cover from that vantage point. But I know that when those stories happen, I have a level of perspective that most people in my industry can't provide. And I think it's something that an obligation would make it almost seem like a burden, but something I seek out as something to write about, because I know that I can bring a different perspective to the table that other people can't. And I want to make sure that Asian American stories are being told as holistically as possible, and make sure that for my future kids or my nieces and my nephews, like that they feel like they're being represented in a way that I didn't necessarily feel in the same way when I was growing up.
And I guess what does AAPI month mean to you? And like, are you doing anything for this month?
Um, like I feel like AAPI month is like something that's kind of happened post 2020, and so like it's not something that I necessarily like really grew up like thinking about a lot. It's been nice to see that like there are more opportunities to talk about Asian American identity since then, and so in that sense, I am very grateful that like it's something that people like create time to especially recognize. But like I would say that I'm not particularly celebrating it in the sense of like going out to dinners or throwing parties in a specific way, but I am like, I think that like it's been interesting to see how Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year has become a much bigger thing culturally. And They're just like small things that I see every single day where it's just like I try not to focus on just like the fact that the month of May is like, now has become this like corporate thing that people talk about. But I kind of try to take a bigger picture view on things where it's like um, trying to recognize and appreciate the small steps that have been taken and the progress that has been made in my lifetime. So I always try to remind myself about that kind of stuff.
And is there any, I guess, like societal issues, amongst the Asian community people should be like educated about or there should be awareness on?
Sure. Um, I would say that the major one is like for a long time, people in the Asian American community wanted just representation and they would take any form of it. And it felt like the barrier to have representation was so high. Just to have a movie made, a TV show made was so high. And I think that one of the signs that the Asian American community is not in the same place that we were even 5, 6 years ago is that there's mediocre Asian American TV shows and movies like getting to the movie theaters and getting produced now. And I think that that's actually a sign of progress that like there's not the weight of like this is the thing and it has to succeed or else like we're never going to see an Asian American movie ever get made again. Like I kind of felt that way when Crazy Rich Asians came out. Like it almost felt like the entire like Asian American diaspora in the United States was like put this like weight of pressure on it that I think was almost even unfair to a certain degree. And I think now that we're kind of in this place, I think when you look at the representation that exists for Asian Americans in media, I think it tends to come from a specific like socioeconomic background, and it tends to come from one of either China, Korea, or Japan. And I think that the next step for I think Asian American representation in general is having more nuanced conversations about like Asian identity. There's a lot of conversation around Asians right now. There's lots of Southeast Asians. There's people from all different types of economic backgrounds, and I think that like current contemporary Asian American media, we tend to see a very similar Asian American point of view that is portrayed in pop culture. And I think that widening that type of representation is the next step that the community has to take. And I hope is further represented in conversations, but also pop culture discourse, all that stuff.
And I guess I know you explained this a little bit before, but like I guess explaining how do you show your culture? I mean, like, is there any way else you've done that before?
Sure. I mean, I like to wear a lot of Asian American fashion brands. I buy a lot of clothes from overseas just because it fits me better than the clothes that I buy in the United States. So there's that. It's also I think just like my point of view, my points of reference. Like, as someone who is Korean American, I have certain movie tastes and point of view and music references that like other sports journalists especially do not have. And so I don't see it as something that I'm almost like trying to hit people over the head with, but I think that it's something that kind of emerges naturally from how I talk about the world. Um, my perspective on certain current events or topics, and the cultural reference points that I kind of bring in to synthesize whatever story I might be covering on a week to week basis.
And I guess is there maybe anything else you'd like to add for the interview or maybe some advice for say like Asian Americans who are interested in like sports journalism and want to get into that?
Um, I think my best advice for anyone who wants to pursue sports journalism in particular is create as many opportunities for yourself to do the type of work that you want to do. Um, when I was in college, I created a lot of opportunities to do feature writing and magazine writing. And the first job I got out of college was writing and magazine writing. And if you asked kind of a lot of sports journalists like the advice to get to that point, they would have told you, oh, become a beat writer and then kind of work your way up to that point. I think that in the media industry in particular, people give you the opportunity to continue doing the work that you're doing. And so for me right now, it's like I want to make YouTube videos and I want to do that for a very long time. So I'm trying to create as many opportunities for me to continue making YouTube videos. If it's making TikToks or doing TV or radio, like just create a reel and a resume that shows people in decision making positions that you know how to do the thing that you want to do for the long term. And so I think that college is the best place to experiment with that because, like you have the opportunity to, there's so much free time in college. And, you know, you, if you use that time wisely, you can really create a lot of opportunities for yourself to set yourself up for your career.
I just want to say thank you again. And I
Of
also
course.
wanted to add, since you mentioned about your YouTube channel, I'm also a subscriber as well, and your content is really amazing and informative as someone who is also interested in sports journalism as well too.
Yeah,
Um, I guess just one question, I don't know if this is kind of off topic because I
sure.
created like a small independent sports magazine.
Hmm.
And basically, like you said, I'm trying to use up my time in college wisely. And um, with that magazine, like it's just based off, interviewing like, college athletes about like what they do, but also at the same time, like exploring their creative side if they have a creative outlet. So like one of my friends, she's like a cheerleader at Northwestern. I interviewed her about like, being a cheerleader there, but also being a writer at the same time. And then like I had also interviewed sorry, a swimmer as well who goes to NYU, but she also does film on the side as well. And I think one of the biggest things that I've done also recently is, you talked about the Winter Olympics. I recently interviewed Erin Jackson. She was a speed skater at the Winter Olympics as well, and
Hmm.
I talked to her as well. And so I guess for me, like, I guess any advice on how maybe I should progress with the magazine? Well, maybe not just athletes, but maybe like other sports journalists, anyone else in the sports industry.
Sure. I think that like one of the biggest gateways to get a foot in the door in this industry is covering sports and culture, like how sports intersects with pop culture, but also politics, with basically all the stuff that I kind of cover on the YouTube channel, like business, like I think it's really important to just like become like to learn a little bit about everything and understand how sports intersects with all of those things, and covering those things and like I'm always looking for angles that kind of show like how do I always think about like how I feel about what's going on in the world, and I think about how can I tell a story about that through the lens of sports. So like for this week, for example, like I'm doing a video on sports video games and how sports video games have kind of stagnated. They haven't gotten quite better, a lot better in the last, I would say, 5 or so years. And like, what are the business incentives that have kind of led to that? But also like, there's all these microtransactions. Like it's kind of become a little bit more like gambling. And so it's like, how does that change the culture around playing sports video games? And so I'm always trying to look for kind of these big like human themes and always trying to tell human stories through the lens of sports. And so I would encourage you to just like continue figuring out how to tell stories about sports beyond just like the wins and losses, which is always fun. But like, there's, as I'm sure you know from doing this, like there's a whole lot more to sports than just that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much.
Of course.
Yeah. Of course, keep doing what you're doing and love your content.
Thank you.
And yeah.